What's going on, Dominators? Rico Garcia here. I am your host, and I want to welcome you to yet another amazing episode of Restoration Domination. And if you've ever asked yourself, like, where standards come from in our industry, right? The IICRC standards, everybody is always talking about them, but there's a lot of confusion about, how they even come to exist in the first place and how to properly use them. And generally speaking, when we start talking about standards, we kind of feel like it's a little bit of a boring subject, right? My take has always been, how can you take something that seems a little daunting, a little boring, that yes, we know that we should abide by, but a lot of people just kind of disregard it for a later date. The best way to go ahead and bridge that is by tying it directly into your bottom line and your profitability. And today we are joined with Mili Washington, which just so happens to be the standards director, like the person who makes all of this magic happen. And she shares her insights on, first of all, where the standards come from, how it comes to be. We talk about the importance of each and every single one of us, regardless if we have a $100,000 company or a $50,000 a year company, or if we've got a $50 million a year company, how each and every single one of us within the industry have a voice and how we can go ahead and leave our footprint on the industry. We also talk about something really exciting, which is how to use these standards to help you increase profitability when it comes down to billing insurance and billing your customers, things of that nature, and so much more. This is a really exciting episode. But before we jump in, I want to give a big shout out to our show sponsors, starting with our platinum sponsors, Carlos Machine, the Claims Machine, with policyholder advocates. Remember, every single month we have a public adjusting corner bonus episode that we do where we talk about public adjusters and policies and case studies and scenarios where public adjusters have been able to help restoration companies really maximize the claim for their clients and just avoid a whole lot of headaches along the way. So make sure that you tune in. Every month we have an additional show, which is filled with tidbits of information there directly from the pro himself. Also, a big shout out to our very own Legal Corner, Lawyer Britt. Again, every single month we have an additional episode just dropping massive value bombs. So this way you can stay abreast of what's happening with legislation, what's happening with contract changes, staying abreast of what is happening in the insurance arena and what this means for your billing, your livelihood, and things of that nature. Tons of case studies as well. And she also shares every once in a while some amazing tidbits on how to position yourself using social media, because she's really amazing at doing that. So also want to give a big shout out to CNR Magazine, which you should already have your subscription, because we rant and rave about CNR Magazine all the time. But if you haven't, no big deal. Just head on over to cnrmagazine.com. Upper right-hand corner of the screen, just should be a big red button. Just go ahead and smash that, fill out your details, and boom, you are officially a subscriber with your finger on the pulse of what's happening inside of our industry. So without further ado, let's jump into the show with Mili Washington. Let's go.
Welcome to the Restoration Domination Podcast, where you learn actionable advice that moves the needle and helps service-based businesses dominate. Here's your host, Rico Garcia Jr.
All right, and we are live. Mili, welcome to the show. Are you ready to help us dominate?
Hi, Rico. Thank you for having me. Absolutely. This is exciting. I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. So for those that may not be familiar with the name and that may not necessarily know what this podcast is all about, do me a favor, kind of fill in some of the gaps on my intro. Let everybody know who you are and what you do for the industry.
Sure. So I have been active as a standards professional for the last 15 plus years or so. And I've been in this industry, which is cleaning, inspection, restoration, for over 11 years, more than a decade. I didn't think I'd be here this long, but I clearly enjoy what I do, which is why I'm here. My background educationally is economics for my bachelor's and environmental policy for my master's. And I thought I'd work for the EPA or something like that. That was the dream at one point. But I did take a little bit of a career sort of a change. I don't know if it's a change as much as it was a tangential move towards standards. Starting with the American Industrial Hygiene Association, I was with them for 7 years. And really, that's where I got my start in standards work and learned about it, got my certification. So I am a certified standards professional through the Society for Standards Professionals. And so shortly after that, joined IICRC, and it's been a fun ride. Just being in this industry, it's a very passionate industry, lots of people with lots of opinions, strong opinions, shall I say, which makes it interesting. It makes it fun, and it makes each day a little bit different. And I'm also, I mentioned the Society for Standards Professionals. I'm an active member of the society. I've been on their board of directors for almost a decade, and I'm the immediate past president of SES. And so I'm just immersed in standards work, and I'm hoping that I can shed some light and answer some questions and hopefully not put anyone to sleep today.
Hopefully, like, people are probably hearing like standards, like, oh my God, it's just going to be one of those shows. But I promise, I think that this is going to be really exciting, right? Because at least for me personally, I have a lot of questions about how these things even come into existence, right? Because I know I've never really had a conversation with, a local restorer who says, yeah, I'm working hand in hand with the IICRC, or, like nothing along those lines. So the first things first is, like, let's just kind of dive into the top level thing, right? How do these standards even come to be? Like, where do they come from? Do we have just like some old school, 30 plus year veterans that, have been in the restoration arena, and they're just, tired of being in the field and just decided to pick up a pen and a sheet of paper and start writing down their romanticized version of what restoration should look like? Or what does that process look like? Just kind of walk us through that process.
Okay, Rico, how much time do you have?
This is going to be fun.
Okay, and like I said, I don't want to put anyone to sleep, but I will give you sort of a summarized view of the process. And to answer your question, yes, we do have some veterans, industry veterans, that help us with the writing of the standards, but we're also very mindful that we try and attract a cross section of the industry to our standards writing process. First of all, to begin with, we are IICRC is an ANSI accredited standards developer, and what that means is everything we do is scrutinized by ANSI. We are audited every 5 years. Every standard we write, all the processes we use, the procedures are reviewed and audited by an ANSI auditor every 5 years. And it's a pretty stringent, rigorous process. Some days it takes the joy out of working, but honestly, the reason we do it is because the end product is worth the work. It's worth jumping through all the hoops to get to where we get to. Now, the bulk of the process, the bulk of the drafting is done by what we call a consensus body, essentially a committee of experts who come together to write the standard. Why do we write some standards and not write others? Essentially, if there is a gap in the industry, if there's no written guidance for a particular topic, say trauma and crime scene cleanup, I'll give you that as an example. A few years ago, it was identified as something that, the industry needed guidance on. And so we put together a group of experts. And by saying that, let me clarify what I mean by that. IICRC, as the standards developer, doesn't actually write a word of these standards. I don't write a word. No one on our staff writes a word. We don't have a vote. We don't have a say. I like to say, we're just hosting the party, and we invite anyone who has an interest in being at the table. So, the idea is stakeholders from the industry, and that could mean veterans. It could mean someone who is newer. I mean, it generally tends to be people with a little more experience, because that level of confidence and sort of feeling like okay, I'm ready to give back. And how do I give back? And I think standards writing is a big part of that. It comes with time, right? So usually it's not going to be someone who's been in the industry for 18 months. It's, that just doesn't happen. But that being said, the idea is to have a cross section of stakeholders. The idea is to have different companies, is to have some representation from those who teach, to have some representation from those who do, right? So users of the standard, producers of the standard, producers are not really of the standard, but the service that the standard covers. So if you produce that trauma and crime scene cleanup, if that's what you do as your service, then you are called a producer in our standards. If you just have an interest, say something happened to you in the past and you have an interest in this topic area and you just want to have a say because you have experience, then you would fall under general interest category. So we try to invite folks to the table, right? And I think of it as, and I've said this often, if you're not at the table writing the standard and being part of that process, you could very well be on the menu. And I mean, who wants that, right? I mean, you'd rather have a say in the process. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to give up multiple hours a week to be on a committee and to do the work of drafting the standard. That involvement and that sort of that voice at the table could come in many different forms. You could do the all-out voting membership, which is a commitment and it takes, a good deal of time. Or you could participate in the public review process. So any of our standards before they're published are available to the general public. Literally anybody who has an interest in a particular topic area has access to a draft standard before it's finalized. And then if they have something to say, if they have a comment, if they have an objection, if they have a suggestion, then they can submit public review comments to us. And Rico, I will share that literally every comment that comes in is reviewed, responded to, and we make changes to the standards very often based on those comments. And so that's another way to have a voice in that process, to make sure that it's not a handful of veterans or anybody really, a handful of people sitting in their garage and writing a standard. That's not how we do it. I think maybe decades ago there was some truth to that, but that isn't how we do it. We try to keep a very open and transparent process. And when we're starting a new standard, we put out word far and wide. Now, how do we do that? It's not just IICRC. We don't just put it on our website. And if you happen to not have come to our website, you have no idea that we're writing a new standard, right? So what we do is we do press releases and we use our industry media partners to be able to put that word out there. And we keep our call for membership open for months at a time, just so that we're sure that all the right stakeholders are aware of it. We keep putting out, we're like, okay, we're accepting applications for such and such standard, and the application deadline is such and such. Here's the link. And so we want to make it easy. We don't want to make it difficult. Barriers to entry that's not the point of how we do it. We do have a voting membership on every committee and a non-voting membership. And what that does is it allows us a little flexibility if we lose members over a period of time to move people up. We also have to think about balance on a committee. So I mentioned the different interest categories. We have users, producers, and general interest. And we have to make sure that there is some level of balance, so we can't have a committee that represents only producers, because then the content of the standard would be skewed and that would not be fair to those who are using the standard. And so those are some of the guidelines that ANSI provides to all standards developing organizations. And if we don't follow those guidelines, we will very quickly lose our accreditation. And so, those are the hoops I mentioned. We jump through hoops and every one of them is worthwhile because the end product is a better standard when we have that open, transparent process. And when we make sure that if you as a commenter are not happy with 5.6.1, well, let's look at what you have provided as alternative language and let's see if that makes sense. And sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. And if it doesn't make sense to a committee, then the committee has to provide a rationale for why they are not accepting your comment, right? And there are times we will receive a half a dozen comments, and there are times we will receive 1,500, 2,000 comments. And it slows the process down. It's not a very quick and nimble process. But I like to think that our end product speaks for itself. We think of it as the industry speaking, not IICRC. IICRC is really just hosting it. And so I guess that's a call from my side to, to some of you who are listening today. If it's something that you've been interested in or something you've considered in the past, I invite you. Come join us. It's fun. It can be frustrating, but it's hugely rewarding. And so come join us, join a committee and see what it's all about.
So really, it's the IICRC is providing the voice in print, if you will, of the people that have contributed. So how much back and forth is there, right? When it comes down to developing a new standard and or updating an existing standard, how much back and forth is there when it comes down to making any one of these changes, right? I mean, I would imagine because, you have different viewpoints. You have the people that have a direct financial interest, people that may not necessarily have a financial interest, but just have more of a scientific view on what may need or may not need to be done. So I got to imagine that these things could get very, very passionate and, enter a level of debate. How do we keep people as friends, I guess, within the committee and trying to come to a consensus and say, okay, cool. This makes you happy. This makes you happy. Mm-hmm. This is the actual best thing for the end consumer. This is the best thing for the employee. Let's all agree on this one thing. Is it usually a nice, smooth process, or does it get heated from time to time?
It's usually fairly smooth, Rico. I think we do lay out the expectations at the beginning. And I think that's what's important, is to explain to anyone that's involved with standards writing that it's a consensus process, which means it's not unanimous, which means 100% of your committee does not have to agree to certain verbiage or a paragraph or, the whole standard for that matter. As long as we have consensus, we are okay to move forward. What does consensus mean? So each, we define consensus as having 2/3 approval. So if our committee is 10 people, then, 7 need to approve it. And we can have 3 dissenting votes on that committee, and it would pass the muster that ANSI requires for approval. That being said, we have made every effort and succeeded for the most part to have 100% approval on all of our standards. And that's the big picture, right? That's the standard. But when it comes to the little detail, the one sentence that they're discussing, and you're right, passions run high. Everyone comes with a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge, and this, absolute belief that I know what I'm talking about, and this is what I've seen in the field, and my experience speaks volumes so there's some of that. For the most part, it's managed quite well because most people are very courteous about, okay, I don't agree with you, but let's hear what you have to say, and let the committee then decide which way we go. And this understanding that I may not get my way every single time, and that's okay. Because we're writing something that's new, we're doing something that's radical, and we're providing this guidance to an industry where there was none before. And so we're not making stuff up, but we are putting together our combined know-how, our combined experience, and it must reflect that. And so therefore, if I stand alone in my experiences and the rest of the committee has a differing opinion, then I have to say, okay, I disagree, and that's okay, we can move forward. Or I have some comments and maybe we can tweak it a little bit so that I'm okay with it. And usually, that's the case. Like I said, we've had 100% approval, and 99% of the time it's conflict free. And when there are exceptions, we work very carefully to make sure that we're able to move forward and it's not a deadlock situation.
Right. The whole thing just shuts down. We don't get standards for like 15, 20 years. Right. Which makes sense, right? Because again, there's so many different opinions, there's so many different experiences, different sectors of the market view it, inherently differently. So, there's bound to be these areas where there's really high passions about how it should be worded and what the standards should actually be. If this is a recommendation or if this is an absolute must do type of deal. And there's a lot of responsibility that goes with that, right? Because these are, in a lot of cases, these are standards that are in fact being quoted by restoration professionals, that the insurance carriers are also looking at to define what is needed on a particular project and what is not. So, and that kind of ties us into, a lot of people find standards to be really boring. And we were kind of talking about this off camera a little bit about, like, nobody really wants to learn standards unless it like directly affects their bottom line on the restoration side of the business. So obviously there's knowledge and power. What's your take on, having restoration contractors really take a deeper dive into understanding the standards and how to apply that in their business so that it can positively affect their bottom line?
That's a great question. Maybe the $1,000,000 question that I'll try to answer as briefly as I can. But, in the standards world, we have a saying, standards boost business. Really, that's why anybody is doing this. We're not regulators that are putting out requirements. Our standards are, so obviously a regulation is mandatory and there's no room for flexibility or not following regulation. Meanwhile, an ANSI standard or an industry standard is a voluntary consensus-based standard. And what that means is there really is no requirement to follow it. Therefore, if you choose not to follow it, that's up to you as a provider, a contractor. If that's the way you want to go, that's fine. But ultimately, what does happen is that following a standard which has industry-wide acceptance, right? So this is, like you said, our standards are referenced in lawsuits. They are reviewed and followed by insurance providers. And so if, as a restoration company or technician or organization, if you are not aware of the industry standard and you're not following it, then you're not doing yourself any favors. You're essentially getting booted out of the marketplace, right? Because you're not viable anymore financially. And so there really is the passion, I believe, in this industry is because there's money to be made, a lot of money to be made if it's done well. And following a standard takes you far ahead in standing out from the rest of the crowd in being able to say, well, I follow the ANSI IICRC S500 standard, and this job was done based on the recommendations or the requirements of the 500 latest version, right? So if you followed that, you have something to point to and say, well, here it is. It's in black and white. This is an industry standard, and this is what I did. And therefore, you are at an advantage as opposed to if you say, well, I don't really know what the 500 is. I've heard about it, but
this seemed right. It seemed like the right thing to do at the time, right? It's not as valid of an argument, right? Whenever you can go ahead and quote something and submit that, especially for the majority of us in the restoration arena that are billing insurance, right? We're having an extra party that sometimes is not IICRC certified. They've never really been on one of these job sites, so our role in some roundabout way, although this will probably get some pushback, is to kind of educate them on what the process is. And instead of doing that over a phone call or over several weeks, we're having to do that, or we should do that right up front, right when we're submitting our documentation to begin with. And it's all there. So that way, if they're ever in question as to why something was done, to have that F9 note or some kind of note for the insurance carrier, whoever's going to be reviewing it. Heck, even if this is not an insurance type deal, even if it's just the homeowner that, is reviewing and wondering why it is that you set up containment a certain way, or you did this cleaning a certain way, or whatever that may look like, to be able to say, hey, look, this is what we did and why we did it, not based on our opinion, but based on industry standards and industry opinion, that carries a tremendous amount of weight. One question that I have is, typically, how often are these standards looked at? I mean, is there like a normal life cycle to say, hey, look, do we need to revisit this standard? Have things changed here? Is there like a recurring schedule, or how does that come about?
So this is job security for me, but standards have to be reviewed and updated on a 5-year cycle as per ANSI requirements. Now, in that 5 years, there is some flexibility built into the system, because sometimes you're just unable to meet the 5-year deadline because you may have multiple rounds of public review, for example. So you may have one round of public review, you make some changes that are significant to the standard based on the comments that come in. Well, that now requires a second round of public review. So I will tell you, with the last revision and publication of the S500, we had 5 rounds of public review. That's a lot, with thousands of comments coming in each round. And so it kind of can delay the process. That being said, so the recommendation ideally is every 5 years, every standard must be reviewed, changed, updated, and published or reaffirmed. What that means is everything looks good. We're going to just, editorially just make sure it's in ship shape, and we're going to put it back out there.
So quick question on that, like a little sub question.
Yeah.
What's the oldest standard that you know of that has just been reaffirmed? In other words, it hasn't really changed. It's been reviewed and like, yep, still looks good today. Like, is there one in particular that just is kind of like the original standard in any of the standards that you're aware of?
Well, no, fortunately, pretty much everything that we do revise and republish. There was a time where we thought we would be reaffirming the S800. That it didn't happen. So we're working on revising it. Our very first standard, I believe, was 1991. And so we've been revising and republishing. That was the S100 carpet cleaning standard. So we've been doing that, every 5 years. Now, I will say, though, that if you cross that 10-year mark, if you go 10 years without revising and republishing a standard, then ANSI just automatically withdraws their approval of the standard, because in their eyes, that's too old. It could be outdated information, and it should not be out there as a current standard. And so they withdraw their approval, and you got to start the process all over again. So that's my ultimate clock. It should never hit anywhere close to the 10 years, but we do strive to do a 5-year revision cycle to the extent possible.
That makes a lot of sense. So what's like on the horizon for, the IICRC when it comes down to informing the general public of, the importance of the IICRC? And one of the things that you and I were talking about off camera was the IICRC certifications and us quoting standards and all of this stuff, kind of us in the industry for the pros. It's a little bit of boasting to a certain degree of our knowledge base, but really for the end consumer, in a lot of cases, they don't know. Like, they don't know that a standard exists. They don't understand like how important that standard could be, and the difference between having someone who's following a standard versus some guy or gal who just got an air mover and a DHU and decided to call themselves a water restoration tech. What does that look like? What does that battle look like on the IICRC forefront for the general public?
Yeah, I get emails and calls all the time from consumers, just people who, first of all, to start off with, had a really bad situation, whether it was a flood or a fire or something just absolutely awful happened to them. And they engage the services of a restorer or a cleaner, and it's totally a botched job. And they come to us saying, help, we don't know what to do. And it's not something that we really can get involved with at an institute level. But one of the things that we're working hard, and it's a long, long road to go down, but we're working hard to make state legislators aware of the industry standards. And the idea behind that is to assist with more public-private partnership, is to harmonize our efforts. And there is this requirement that comes down from ANSI to all SDOs, as well as to government regulators, to use existing standards to help draft the regulations in the states. And so that's something that we are working on now. It is a slow and sometimes bureaucratic process, but it's essential for us to do that, to have more of a lobbying presence and to share awareness of our standards, especially the ones that have been in the industry for a long time and have this recognition. 500, 520 come to mind. So we're working with the Texas regulators to see how the S520 can be incorporated into regulation. And so they're learning about it. There's a lack of awareness when it comes to industry standards. And so that's obviously, our job to help spread that awareness and to do that on a state by state basis. And so we're heading down that path, but I'll tell you, Rico, it's a long road.
Right. I can imagine. Is there anything that you would say in your mind, restoration contractors that are the boots on the ground can do, or that you think that they should do in order to perpetuate the importance of using IICRC certified technicians and companies? Do you think that there's something that restoration contractors should be doing more of, or not really? It doesn't matter. It's not really their place.
No, I think it's everyone's place to be able to talk about the standards, to be able to talk about certification. So a lot of IICRC certifications are based on the standard. So we consider the standard to be the base on which everything else stands. It's the foundation for a lot of our certifications. And so being aware of the standards, being able to say, you know, this is what the standard says, and being able to pull that up. So we have a subscription site, and this is my plug for the IICRC subscription site. It's great because, yeah, the plug. So what's nice is you can be a technician on the field. You can be in someone's house and you're not 100% sure what the standard says about something. Pull it up. Right? You don't even have to be online to be able to access this information. Say a customer says, why are you doing this? Why are you pulling this out? Yeah, this does not need to, you don't need to go this far. What's going on? A technician, anyone at any level, who has access to the subscription site, can pull it up and say, well, here's what it says in the standard, and we're following the standard. And that, I think, gives the customer that added level of confidence and security, knowing that their home is being well taken care of by a professional who follows the industry standard. They may not know what it is, but just being made aware of that, I think everyone has a place and a role to play in that. And our hope is that they're able to proudly display their IICRC badge and sort of give people empathy and a feeling of being reassured when, in some cases, they're going through the worst experiences of their life.
That's beautiful. So one of the questions that I think is important is, and I hope that you can fill in some of these gaps, or at least, give us your opinion on it, is how should a restoration tech and or owner operator, whatever the case may be, is there a recommended way or a proper way to use the standard, study the standards, get used to using it as a reference guide? Is there a way to where, in your opinion, it's not daunting, and if they need to find something related to a particular project that they can quickly gain access to? But before you answer that, let's just take a quick moment to thank our sponsors. Hey, Dominators, real quick, let me ask you a question. How would you like to increase productivity? How would you like faster claims resolution? And more importantly, how would you like to reduce litigation? Well, this is exactly what Impartial allows you to do. Impartial creates timely, accurate estimates for faster and fair claim settlement. Building upon Matterport's technology, the Impartial Scope tool extracts the relevant data embedded with pre-mitigation and post-mitigation scans, and subsequently renders an exactimate or assimilability estimate that can be approved by a carrier without any hesitation. The magic here is that the software helps contractors generate mitigation and repair estimates for more rapid approval from insurance carriers while removing the burdensome administrative process. Each Impartial estimate is produced with objective accuracy using immersive 3D imagery and precise physical and geospatial measurements. Impartial, in my opinion, is one of those tools that simply can go ahead and change your business. And with so many features such as impartial tags, timestamp matter tags, the ability to upload JPEG, PNG, ESX, and so much more, Impartial is that software that could genuinely change your business. Make sure that you check them out in the video description below or in the show notes and see for yourself. Hey, Dominators, real quick, let me ask you a question. Have policyholders struggled to come up with your money because it's held with the mortgage company? Or does the percentage of uncollected debt that you collected in 2021 exceed over 2.5%? Or even better, let me ask you this. Do you dread negotiating with your policyholder when it comes time to collect your final payment and deductible? So look, if you answered yes to any of these questions, then you need to check out Surety. You see, Surety is a third-party fund control company. And what they do is they ensure that you get paid faster, and more importantly, completely for the hard work that your crews are doing. Surety relieves not only the policyholder, but you of tremendous administrative burden while ensuring the claims process, and more importantly, the proceeds flow via ACH to the rightful owner, you, the restorer. And here's the best part. For less than the average credit card fee, Surety delivers on numerous fronts. So here's what I want you to do. If you want to learn more about how Surety can help you, I want you to head on over to www.surety.com/dominate and request a free demo today. Now listen, Restoration Domination listeners, just like you, are going to receive a really cool offer. And here it is. You're going to receive an exclusive offer, which includes free processing for the first insurance claims check and 3 months of free access within their network. Again, that's Surety, sureti.com/dominate. Photo documentation is possibly one of the most important aspects of what it is that we do in the restoration business. Not only so that the client knows exactly what's going on, but also so that you can prove your work to insurance companies. One of the best ways that I found to go ahead and document our projects is by using Companycam. Companycam is an amazing app. It has so many features, everything from time-stamped and GPS located photos, individual project files, unlimited photo storage, in-app communication with your crew, a live stream of all of your projects as the photos are coming in, as if it was an Instagram feed. So from a managerial standpoint, Companycam can help you there as well. But more importantly, it gives you the ability to protect your organization while documenting and keeping everything nice and neat. So we've got a really special offer for you. If you go to companycam.com/dominate, not only will you get your 14-day free trial, but you're also going to get the first 2 months 50% off. So again, head on over to companycam.com/dominate, get the app, and I'm sure you're going to love it. Okay, so we're back. So before we left, what we were talking about, or about to jump into, is how to easily and effectively use and study and familiarize yourself with the standards and the references within the standards to make it less daunting. In other words, make it more friendly for, a regular Joe to, pull out the book or pull out the standard and say, hey, yeah, this is what's relevant to me. So what's kind of your take on that? Do you have any recommendations?
I do, but there's a caveat. So once again, I'm going to point to the subscription side because it's online access, and because I think we have to think about the generations that are coming. That being said, we have our standards available in all formats. We have the print versions, we have the PDF versions, and then we have the online access. To me, I consider myself to be young, although technically I'm not. But to me, the best way to do that is to find information on an online version of the standard, right? Because it can be daunting, like you said. Some of the standards are 200 plus pages long, and we do want our readers to read the entire standard cover to cover, because that's the only way to get all the information and all the context and the connecting points between the different sections and subsections. But understanding that in reality, that is not going to happen, right? So an easy way to do it is, if you're looking for a particular phrase or a particular reference within the standard, you can do a quick search and it shows right up. It will even show up in multiple standards. And so you can pick and choose, depending on the job that you're on, what specifically you're looking for. And it will provide you that information. You can copy it, you can share it with your coworker or your boss or your customer as needed. You can highlight it so that next time you need that information, it's already highlighted in your online copy, right? So there's many different ways in which we want to make it easy. But like I said, the caveat is, the problem with it being easy is, if you only read those 2 sentences in the standard, you may not know how it's connected to other parts of what you're supposed to do, the pre-restoration work, the post-restoration work, because you just kind of zeroed in on that. So our goal is to make it easy, but I think that certification part that goes hand in hand with the standards part of it then ensures that you really have a good understanding of the entire document and the intent with which it was written.
Is there, and again, goes back to more of steady practices, as in other words, how you study a particular subject matter. Are the standards written in a way that you would recommend a certain type of study pattern? I know that reading things cover to cover, it would be ideal, but even within that, sometimes there's this loss of context because you kind of have to get through a tremendous amount of material. Even though it's all intertwined, there's still like all of these little different offshoots, right? So, for example, I mean, just looking at category 1, category 2, category 3 water losses, right? Like it's all a water loss, but it's all very different, right? And we have to approach it very differently. So again, if you have the online version, let's say, is there a way to organize it more tailored to an individual company's needs? And if so, like what would the recommendation be? In other words, how can we make extracting the information that is relevant to one individual based on their business model as easy as possible so that they can say, okay, these are the things that we are consistently doing. And I was able to draw this information out of the standards and get the references that I need so that they're easily and readily available.
Really good question. I would say we have a flashcards feature, which I think is very helpful. So like you said, if there's a dozen things that you need to be aware of, and then you need to remember on each job and maybe pass on to 7 other people, you can create flashcards. And you can it's like learning for a test. You can look at your flashcards, right? Flip them over and see if you got something right, and it'll kind of go through that process till you get everything right. So it's kind of like a learning module. That being said, everyone learns very, very differently. We try to have visuals, but they're very limited in the standards themselves. We do hope to have more QR codes and being able to bring in information that's more interactive and engaging, but that's something that we're working on. And, as standards writers, I often remind my committee folks that not everyone will understand all the words that you want to use to convey this. So let's keep it simple to the extent possible so that it's easier, the flow is easier to follow for someone who hasn't actually done the writing, because those who are writing it, they know it. They're very clear in their head what they're trying to say. And they'll overthink it often because they're just that's who they are. So I have to remind them, let's keep it simple. Let's keep it simple. Okay, that's not a word that everybody understands. And of course, we also understand that English is not the first language for everyone. And so that's something that we're looking at as well. We do have a couple of French versions of standards, French translated standards, and we're looking at Spanish, but the costs are almost prohibitively high for us to do that at the time. But that being said, it's something that we're aware of and hoping to do better with in the future.
Nice. And by the way, for everybody watching and listening, there is a link that I'm going to provide in the show notes below if you're listening to the podcast, or if you're watching the video itself. If you look in the video description, there's going to be a link as well that Milli was able to provide us, which is a pretty awesome offer where if you fill everything out, you get to unlock a 35% discount on all current IICRC standards exclusively for all you dominators out there, which, big shout out to Ms. Washington for that. So make sure that you check that out if you want to get your hands on the latest standards. And if you want to get that at a discount, that way you can rub it in everybody's face or just share the link and tell them they have to follow the show. Either way, it's a win for everybody. So what's like on the horizon now for the IRC? Like what is the next big thing that you guys are tackling besides everything that you guys already have, trying to keep everything, up to date and, everything that goes along with the regular chaos of the day to day? What are the next big things that you guys are trying to tackle within the industry?
So Rico, you're right. There are many balls up in the air, and my goal is to keep the glass ones up, and if needed, the plastic ones can fall, right? So that being said, we're very excited about a couple of different things. So we're writing fire standards. That's obviously a huge gap in the industry, and we've been asked for, I don't know, a decade now, maybe, what's the update, what's happening. And so we finally are at the point where we're getting close to public review, not close to publication, but close to public review for our 2 fire standards. One is a general fire and smoke restoration standard, and the other is specific to wildfire. damage. And so we are finishing up the drafting process for both of those standards, which has been a multi-year process, mammoth, but we're very excited about the content of these two standards, and we hope to put them out for public review towards the end of this year and then publish them in 2023. So that, I think, is the most important thing. When it comes to announcements, we also have a new safety and health for professional cleaners field guide. So that's technically not a standard, but it provides a lot of information on safety and health that we usually, it's too much for us to include in the standard. So we've been able to pull out all that safety and health information and have it standalone. And really the goal, we fail at this often, but the goal is to provide information in smaller chunks. So to not have those 300, 400 page volumes that nobody is going to look at, but to provide smaller chunks. As I said, we fail all the time at it, but that's the goal. And forward thinking, the idea is let's do smaller standards. Let's do things that someone, they say that our attention span is actually less than that of a goldfish. And I believe that mine is, so I don't see why anyone else's wouldn't be, right?
Already,
so
I'm
we
like,
have to
like
be
3 times, like while you said that, I was like, what are we talking about again? Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Thanks. I must be very interesting to talk to.
Yeah, these are like attention span is real. It's really, it's just getting shorter and shorter by the minute because we're getting bombarded with all of these different things.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you add to that the regular day-to-day mix. And then all of a sudden you see like this huge book and you're like, but I'm already in the business. And you default to mentally, like, I already know what I'm doing. Right.
Yeah.
And for me, from a business perspective, it's like, right. But then how much are you missing? And, are there nuggets that you can extract that are going to make things easier, faster, more profitable, things of that nature? And all of a sudden, when you look at it from that lens, now you're capturing people's attention. You're like, okay, cool. Well, I can go ahead and kind of go prospecting for gold throughout this, standard and see how it affects my business in a positive way. And I think that that's like how, the attention all of a sudden gets expanded a little bit. It's like, how can we make it interesting from a bottom line perspective to make people dig through and really, understanding the power of education? It was recently with Jeremy Reitz, and he had, some of his people, on stage talking about some really, really, boring stuff. If you just listen to, if you just hear like the subject matter, you'd be like, oh my God, I don't want to talk about OSHA regulation. This is going to be horrible. But yet everybody was on the edge of their seat. And the reason, and big shout out to Jeremy Reitz and Next Level and all those guys over there. Amazing event. For all of you Dominators out there, if you haven't gone to the Next Level event, you may want to consider it because it was absolute gold for 2 days straight value. But, the way that this individual was delivering the message, quoting standards, quoting regulation, like all of a sudden, like the public, the insurance adjuster who's making an argument, like they don't have anywhere to go with that. And to me, like that's where the power is, right? Whenever you have the confidence to be like, hey, this is not a up in the air, my sole opinion. Here's how this thing relates to this thing, relates to this thing. And you have that confidence, all of a sudden, getting the information from a 300, 400 page book is really interesting, right? Because you're arming yourself with additional ammo when that's where I think it becomes really interesting. I
like that perspective. And that's exactly the right one to have to be able to get through one of these standards, is to be able to say, I'm following the standard and this is it. It's in black and white. And, to not say, well, I just made that up and seemed like the right thing to do at the time. And I was trying to save money and, whatever. There can be 100 different reasons for why you did something. But the way to do it right and to be able to get that next step, or whether it's the billing or whatever it is to be able to point to something that is an industry standard. It is an ANSI standard. It's not an IICRC standard. I feel like I have to say that over and over again, because really it is the industry that comes together and writes these standards. And, we just facilitate the process. And to be able to point to that and have that knowledge, first of all, to be able to say, well, this is where I took it from. That knowledge is power. And so there's the case for reading the however many pages there are.
Yeah, exactly right. So for anybody watching and listening, if they want to, connect with you, they want to follow you, they want to be more abreast of what's going on with the IICRC, and more importantly, if they want to get involved, right? If they actually want to voice their opinions during these, public reviews and all of this stuff, what are the best channels for them to go to so that they can go ahead and participate?
Yeah, so I think the email is usually best because even if I can't pick up the phone, I will definitely answer or someone will answer. Standards at iicrcnet.org is the catch-all email. And if you have any questions on standards, that's the best way to reach us. We're also on LinkedIn, IICRC, and we provide updates on a regular basis. So if you're just looking to stay updated to know what's going on, what new standards are coming up, or what you can participate in, LinkedIn or the IICRC Standards website, which is iicrc.org/standards, is the best place to go. We try to make sure that it's updated. And if we're accepting applications for any new committees or, standards that we're revising, that information is shared through all of these avenues, including, press releases and emails directly to anyone who signs up. So lots of different avenues, but once again, that email is standards at iicrcnet.org.
That's awesome. And on that note, Milli, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to kind of fill us in on the wonderful and exciting world of how standards come to be. And for all of you dominators out there, make sure links are going to be available in the video description as well as in the show notes below. That way you don't have to go ahead and write anything down or think about it. We're making it really simple for you. Just go ahead and check out the show notes and the video description, and all of the links are going to be available there. Also, don't forget that there is a special link for the 35% discount on all of the current IICRC standards. So if you've been a little bit tight or you just haven't wanted to spend the money, here's an opportunity to go ahead and get a 35% discount. And as per usual, remember to hustle, hack, dominate, and I'll see you guys on the next one.
You've been listening to Restoration Domination, your #1 resource for tips, tricks, and hacks to help your business grow. Subscribe to our channel and follow us for more Restoration Domination. And follow our host at Rico Garcia Jr. on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn. Till next time, this is Restoration Domination. Hustle, hack, dominate.